Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and this is the audio version of my newsletter. So, I was listening to an episode of The News Agents with journalist Lewis Goodall interviewing Jack Clark from AI firm Anthropic. Here's the quote. "Today, lots of people use these systems to learn, but some of them use these systems to do junk food learning, and some use these systems to do effective learning. Junk food learning is upload a research paper and say, tell me what this research paper is about, and then read the output. You haven't actually learned anything there. You've just become dependent on the machine in a way that doesn't help anyone. The way that I use these systems, and many do, is I read a research paper, I write out what I understand the paper to mean, and then I upload that paper and my understanding of it to the system and say, do I have this right? If I don't have it right, explain it to me. That's useful learning." End quote. That was Jack Clark from Anthropic. This is the difference between using AI as a tool and using it as a shortcut. Sometimes a shortcut makes sense, but take too many of them and you might miss something along the route. Going for a walk isn't always about reaching a destination. Sometimes it's about the walk itself. Jack Clark's comment reminded me somewhat tangentially of this recent observation from Mike Sowden, and, quote, "One enduring modern idea I find a bit daft is that other people's summaries of books are just as useful as if you read that book yourself. The point being missed is that you're supposed to be the one doing the summarising after you've read the book. The summary is just a reminder. I know everyone's mileage varies, but for me, skipping reading or skimming a book is like never visiting somewhere in the world and then wondering why you're struggling to remember anything about that place later in your life." End quote. I taught a workshop on storytelling in games many years ago. I'm not a games dev, so this was something of an accident. And subsequently turned it into an essay that you can still find over on the newsletter. One of the key points in that post is that interactivity is not unique to games, despite it often being pointed to as the defining characteristic. Here's a little quote from that essay. "It's easy to think that interactivity is the key difference between games and literature. Video games are evidently interactive, in that the player can affect what happens to a greater or lesser degree. This is what makes them unique as a form. It's an easy statement, but in the context of stories, misses the point that all forms of storytelling are interactive." End quote. And I know I've done a lot of quoting here, so bear with. When people go to Wikipedia to read the summary of what happens in a movie, or use AI to create a quick outline of a novel or report, they're essentially skipping the interactive part. In the case of a movie, reading about the plot will never match the experience of that same story unfolding in front of you, as intended by the filmmakers. An overview of The Great Gatsby isn't the same thing as the sensation of reading it. Skimming a one-pager version of an 80-page scientific report does not lead to the same level of understanding. It bypasses the opportunity for the reader to come up with their own new ideas inspired by the text. This misconception that summarising and experiencing can be equated is in part due to our unhealthy obsession with plot. I used to think that a good complicated plot was necessary for a successful story, and it took me a long while to realise my mistake. I now tend to think of plot as being the least important part of a story. Plot is a sequence of events which are really interesting in isolation. Themes, by themselves, can be the source of endless debate, and compelling characters will captivate you even if nothing in particular is happening. But plot by itself is boring. That's the problem with skipping the text and only reading the summary. It's living without meaning, one event after another, A, B, C, but there's no point. In large part, this is because summarising a plot tends to ignore character and theme, or at least delivers them in a highly reductive manner. A long, convoluted plot can be reduced to a single sentence quite easily. For example, a simple hobbit walks a really long way to throw a ring into a volcano. And it will make sense, even if it misses the point. It's not so easy to reduce a complex character or theme. The quotes I started off with from Mike and from Jack Clark point to something else. Skipping straight to a summary cuts out, perhaps, the most important part of telling a story, fiction or non-fiction, which is when the intent of the author meets the interpretation of the audience. That's when the magic actually happens. It's why everyone has a different opinion of the same book, movie, or song. The collision of creator and audience is generating something entirely new. There's a chemical reaction taking place. That's why Mulholland Drive can be revelatory to some people and drivel to others. It's why Titanic can reduce some people to blubbering wrecks while others scoff at the dialogue. The source text is the same, but it's the point of interaction that makes it into something special and unique. It's no use having someone else or something else simply tell you about it. Take any creative work and every audience member will have had a different and highly personal reaction to it, but send them all to a Wikipedia summary or an AI explanation, and they'll come away with a homogenized, borrowed viewpoint that represents a kind of populist abdication of personal opinion. This is also why I get so annoyed with explainer videos that seek to replace individual interpretation with a unified, single gestalt take. The viewing or the reading or the listening or the playing is the final edit in a long line of edits. The viewer, reader, listener or player is the final artist to work on the project. We each bring our own point of view, which in turn generates new ideas, exciting interpretations, more stories, real discoveries. The real proof of all this is when we return to something years later. As Emily put it over on Notes, and here's another quote, "And here I am rereading books 15 years later and wondering how the book has changed so much. Even my own summary in my head was the summary of a different person." End quote. A movie we watched as a teenager reads differently as an adult. That same movie seems to be altogether changed when we watch it at 25 and then again at 45. Same goes for books, songs, everything. The source text has not changed, but we have. Again, it's that interaction and the collision of the artist and the observer. If we relied entirely on generated summaries or on other people's recounting, we'd rob ourselves of that constant reinvention and re-experiencing, which means we miss out on our own development. Avoid being homogenized. Avoid becoming part of the gestalt take. Go to the source and see what happens. Thanks for listening. You can leave a comment and find loads more stuff a bit like this over on the newsletter at simonkjones.substack.com.